E27 in Singapore needs no introduction. It's the biggest business block of Singapore. If you are in the startup scene, you know how important this guy is. A fair example or analogy would be, there's a TechCrunch in US. If you have to launch your startup, you have to be on TechCrunch, right? In Asia, E27 is that startup. So Mohan is the owner, CEO of that blog startup company. And today we are going to speak to Mohan and ask him some tough questions. Mohan is a friend of mine as well, so we're going to ask some tough questions.
I'm really starting to get worried already. Shashank was going through some questions beforehand, and yeah, they were not very friendly questions.
Right. So first I'll start. My first question would be, what do you see E27 as today?
So firstly, thanks Shashank for the very illustrious introduction to E27, and for giving me this opportunity to just come and share our story. We've been around for a long time, so not many people know like our humble beginnings. So E27 today is I would say a media and events company. We really focus on building the technology startup ecosystem across Asia Pacific. And in terms of where we've grown from the start, right? In the initial days, we really used to look at just Singapore, and today we've started to look at the greater Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific region, and we strongly believe in connecting the various ecosystems together.
How did you start? And you have to start with the start thing, the whole story. And where do you see yourself 2 years from now?
Okay, this would be a long story, right? So I never ever wanted to be an entrepreneur, or I never ever thought of like starting a company. I always was the kind of guy who wanted to work for an Oracle or maybe even a Google. But I had the fortunate ability to spend a year in Silicon Valley, just like Royston, the speaker last month. And that is where I really got infused in the whole startup ecosystem, right? And I'm going to be very honest here, I did not go there to learn about startups or to make my resume look good. I actually went there because my ex-girlfriend at that point of time broke up with me here, so I had to leave the country for a year to start life afresh. And I figured, okay, this will be a perfect opportunity to get out of the country, look at something different and get a whole new perspective in life. So I spent a whole year there, doing online marketing at a startup where I was the very first employee, and seeing how the boss, was going through fundraising and managing employees and trying to get the business going. I figured this is absolutely not for me. I would very much rather join a startup, but the last thing I ever want to do was to start one. And I always figured that I feel more comfortable working with someone and letting that guy be the cheerleader as opposed to being the guy on top. Came back to Singapore and we figured, okay, there isn't really a tech ecosystem here, so let's just start a site, E27. Back then it was started by a few other people. So I joined there, we started that first so that we could talk about what was happening in Silicon Valley and give an Asian perspective. We did that for a while, and we never really had a focus. We were just really doing that for fun. And our aim actually was A, to get popular, B, to give us an excuse to meet people, to party and have fun. And C, very simply, we figured maybe if Google or Yahoo or Facebook might notice us young punks, right, they might give us a job. That never happened because when I graduated, it was December 2008. Financial crisis, major mess, right? And then I got a chance to go back to Silicon Valley again for 2 weeks. It was a consulting project with the National University of Singapore. And I came back and I figured, okay, I really enjoy doing this. I might as well give it like another 6 months or a year and see where it hits to. And let's just see what happens. So for 6 months after that, we really just plowed our way through, suffered. Because we had no business. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. And everyone used to ask me, so what do you do? I'm like, I run E27. What do you really do? Because E27 was viewed in the early days as just a bunch of kids who were just writing stuff. And I was like, that's my real thing. And then people give you the, why don't you go get a real job kind of thing. That's how my parents felt, that's how people around the ecosystem felt. And every month, me and my partners, our employees, will have fish head curry in Pasir Panjang. And we'll ask ourselves, should we continue this? And the answer will always be no. So we say, okay, let's close down the company tomorrow. And we'll figure out something else to do. But the next day, we will always come back to work we always carry on doing what we were doing, and things never really went anywhere. It's only after like May 2009, after we started doing a bit more events, then Facebook started working with us, PayPal, Yahoo started working with us. So we were the first guys that did the Yahoo Open Hack Day in Southeast Asia. So for those of you who are familiar, Yahoo's Open Hack Day in Sunnyvale in California was like a brilliant place for entrepreneurs and startups and geeks to gather and build stuff on Yahoo. So that really gave us a boost in money. So it gave us a lot more opportunities to try different things. And it kind of allowed us for the very first time, right, to work with a corporate company and to be that bridge between startups and the developers, as well as the corporate companies. We hired our first employee around that time. It was quite a big disaster because we had no idea how to manage employees, but we went by. But more so after that, right, we started Echelon. I think it was end 2009 that we started it. It was a complete experiment, right? The IDA came to us and said, hey, we've got 2 guys from Techstars, the incubator, coming to Singapore. Can you put an event together? And we're like, okay, we'll put an event together. So we invited about 100 people. We charged everyone $10 a head. And I think 80 people came up to me and complained and said, why are you charging $10 a head? This is a startup event, it's supposed to be free. And I was like, yeah, but we have no money, right? We were not really making anything from it. And we just plowed our way through. And we did the first Echelon in 2009. The blog was getting a bit more prominent. We did the second Echelon in 2010, and that's when Geeks on a Plane, it became a full-fledged conference. And that's when I actually left the company in July 2010.
Really?
Yeah. So I got sick and tired of the whole startup space, right? To me, it was like, I felt like I wasn't doing anything great. I did one event with 500 people. Dave McClellan was there on stage. We were in the press. Everything was great. And I was like, what's next? So I left for a year and a half to go and do like a mobile social gaming company, just for the heck of it, right?
Which one was that?
That was a company called Go Kill Games. It was sexy, it was fun. I got to go to Indonesia a lot. And those of you who know Indonesia, the party scene there is pretty decent. So that was the excuse that I wanted to have. But it really gave me the skills to understand product management, how to develop products, how to work with technical teams. Company never really went anywhere, but the investor who wanted to invest in that company, one day I had a chat with him and I said, look, I'm not going to do this anymore. And he was like, what the hell, like, here I'm ready to put in money and you don't want to do it anymore. And I said, no, I think I'm thinking of going back to e27. And this was around end 2011. Like all our employees, they were like, it's either you come back or we might as well just shut down the company because it was not going anywhere. We made a huge loss that year. Company was in the shits. So I said, okay, let me just come back in and see if I can rebuild this one more time. Otherwise I'll probably just regret, right? So I said, okay, let me come back in. And in 2 months we closed our first round of funding from the first angel investor. We rebuilt the whole company with 4 people. And early this year we closed another round of funding, which is about 750,000 from a series of investors around the region. And I think the focus and tenacity that we had in the last 2 years, plus all the bad experiences I had before, led us to where we were today. So I was very lucky, I was second time lucky in that sense.
Tell us more about Echelon. How did it become the biggest IT event, sort of startup event in this part of the world? How many of you know Echelon? Echelon is one of the biggest startup events in Singapore. This year, so I was here last year. It wasn't as big, but this year it was huge, literally huge. So how did it become from 100 people, $10 per person to the 10,000 people event?
So we always believe in starting small. So when we did the first one, the 100-person event, we figured that we shouldn't be too ambitious, start small and learn from the audience that was there to see what they really wanted to get out of the event. And in the very early days, right, because the media side was very small, the only real exposure that startups could get was by participating in events. So we catered to the very low end of the startup ecosystem. So a guy that, let's say, launched an app last week, he would be the perfect person to showcase himself at Echelon. A guy who has actually raised money and all that would never come to Echelon at that point in time. And as the event evolved, we figured that we should work with Silicon Valley partners. So that's how we got in touch with Geeks on a Plane. We made sure the timing of the conference fit their schedule, and we were like hosts for them over in this region. And it was also around that point in time where there was a bit more funding in the industry, so the startups were getting of a much better quality than before. And we realized that it would be really awesome, right, to make Echelon like a launchpad event. The event where startups stay in stealth mode and then they kind of launch on that day itself. That model actually never worked after that because it was quite difficult to convince companies to not launch on their own and wait for the event to launch. But it kind of built up the reputation. So that's when like Found, which ended up being funded by Neoteny Labs but closed down later on, they were featured over there. A few other companies launched there. And then in 2011 we did something very different where no other conference had done in this region. We decided to do satellite events. It was getting quite difficult to get regional people to attend a conference in Singapore. Not because the ticket prices were expensive, but because the hotel, the accommodation, the flights and everything, it was just too much for a lot of the regional people. So we said, hey, if you don't want to come down, we'll go there instead. So in 2011, we launched satellite events in Malaysia, Indonesia and Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, we were thinking that people from China would come, but no one from China actually gave a shit about Southeast Asia. But we did get to meet a lot of people from Japan. And that is how word started to spread around the region on what we were doing. So it was always about really listening to what the customers wanted and kind of thinking out of the box in how we could expand our brand and expand our influence. And I think the satellite event model was the one that really redefined a tech startup conference in this region. So I think for this year we had satellites in 10 countries in total, wow, from Japan all the way to Australia.
Wow. If you have startups here, would you recommend them to be a part of Echelon next year?
Depending on which stage they're at and what they're looking for. So if you're a startup that kind of just launched, you don't really have users and traction, then I wouldn't recommend that you be part of Echelon. But if you're a startup that has got traction and you are ready for, let's say, your first angel investment or your first big partnership with a big company, then Echelon is the right platform for you. As the event has evolved, as the conference has evolved, our benchmark for selecting companies has gotten a lot higher as well. So we get like more than 500 companies applying every year, and we only select like 50 from them. So it is, we hate to disappoint, but it is quite difficult to select.
If you're launching for Echelon next year, you can say hello to him now.
Yeah, you can get ready for the June one.
Moving on, tell me about your challenges. What were your 3 challenges when you were starting out, when you were almost giving up, and when you finally became, profitable and successful?
I think the biggest challenge was my age and my inexperience. So when I started it, I was about 25, 26, and it was very hard to get people in the industry to take me seriously at that point in time. Like, what did I know, right? I hadn't really started a tech company at that point in time. My only real experience was the 1 year I spent in Silicon Valley. So I'll never forget this, right? But there was a very senior level MDA government official that flat out, told me in my face in a government event that you're only doing this to make your resume look good.
You want to name him?
No, I don't want to name him, no. He's really left the agency. And he literally just said, you're doing this to make your resume look good, and 3 years from now you're not going to be around, because you're not important. So that was one thing that really struck me. Because too many startups over here, they don't have the tenacity or the perseverance to just push and whack. But we did it, right? And 3 years later at the Singtel event, I managed to see the same guy, pull him one corner in a joking manner, say, hey, we're still around. So is the government going to start taking us a bit more seriously? Or should we, just not work with you guys at all? And subsequently, IDA, MDA, Spring, EDB, all these different agencies started to engage us a lot closer. So that was the first big problem, right? The inexperience. The second thing was, we never knew how to make money. We were never making money. So it was always hard for us to do what we wanted to do because we never had the money to do it. We never paid ourselves anything. In the early days, we paid ourselves like $200 a month. We were surviving on one small consulting project. So that kind of forced us to think really differently, to work with sponsors in a different way, and to really learn how to barter. The most important skill that entrepreneurs should learn is how do you get free stuff? How do you get free space? How do you get free office? Or how do you get free services? And how can you bring value to that person in return? So in the early days, it was all about really hustling and getting free things in return. Third one, right? 3 points, right?
3 points when you were starting out, when you were almost giving up, and now that you're successful.
I think the last one was really, there were so many people who told me that I was wasting my time. No, I had one. So when we were launching Echelon, because I always believe Echelon could have been big, right? And when we were launching Echelon, I was meeting VCs, I was meeting people in the industry that were respected and prominent, and they told me straight on my face, right? Don't waste your time. Why do you want to do this? How big can you be? And you learn to just take these hard knocks in as positive way as you can. But you just have to force yourself not to give up and surround yourself with people who support you instead of bring you down. I think once in a while it's good to have people bring you down so you have a bit of a reality check. But in most cases you build a network of people who would rather support you and help you out rather than just tell you what you're doing is not going to work. So I think those were my three major things.
And now? What about now?
I really don't consider myself successful at all yet. People always benchmark fundraising with success, and I think fundraising is usually it's one of the worst things you can do, because now suddenly you have a bunch of people to report to. You have a certain path that you have to follow that is not entirely dictated by you. So if you raise $1 million or whatever amount, don't think that you are successful. I don't think that should ever be the case. When I see success, right, I tell the team that it is very important to understand what value you are bringing your customers. So when we write about a startup company, it's really important to ask ourselves, right, what value are we bringing to that startup company? And sometimes we underestimate that value. Same thing with if you are running for example, Zopim, right, a live chat service for an e-commerce company. You've got to really ask yourself what value you're bringing that guy. And when you can pinpoint that value and ask yourself how you can repeat that value, that's when you know you're doing something valuable. So I would say we are successful on the basis that we've helped many companies in this region fundraise, get the right relationships or right access to companies, as well as give them exposure. That's where I think we have been successful. But in terms of being profitable or even raising money, I think that is part and parcel of doing a business. If you don't figure those two parts out, right, then you might as well not do it from the start, because you're going to go through a lot of pain and anguish throughout that process.
So let me ask you something. You said investors were giving you a hard time, people were giving you a hard time. How do you build a team? When you're starting out, you're building a company that people don't have a big faith in. How do you build a team? How do you convince people to join your team?
I still have that problem now, to be honest. I think everyone has that problem all the time.
Just for the perspective, we have some entrepreneurs here. What would you tell them from your perspective? How to approach building a team? How to approach the next guy for your team?
So I think different companies will be quite different, right? For us, in the very early day, right, we couldn't convince people to join us based on how much money they were going to get paid. We could convince them to join us based on the exposure that they were going to get in the industry and based on the amazing companies that they were going to meet and going to help. And I think the most important thing every founder or CEO or people in the management team have to be, right, is to be really genuine. Like, don't fake yourself to your employees or the people you want to bring in. Show genuine care and concern for the work you do, and I think people will be able to see that. And in the early days, a lot of our work was pro bono. There was no financial value that we were getting out of it. And our first hires and our initial hires could really see that. So they could see the genuineness in what we were doing, despite us not making money. So at that point in time, the money part wasn't that key. I'll give you a short story that we had. There was a company in Singapore called iTwin. How many of you all know iTwin? Okay, a handful of you guys, right? Very cool device. It's a two-piece, you connect them together, and basically one piece you stick it to your, let's say your computer in Singapore, and another piece you can stick it to any computer around the world. And as long as you have an internet access, both devices can communicate, share data in a very encrypted, secure manner. And in 2009, that was like, holy shit. But these two guys, Cal and I don't remember the other guy's name, he came to us and said, nobody wants to listen to us or see what we're doing. And A-Star that was funding the project was actually going to reject them, or was going to cut their funding completely. They were like, can you help? I was like, hell yeah, I'll put you in Echelon or Unconference back then when it was called. We put them there, people loved them, investors saw them, and some good things happened down the road. Now, a few months later, I think the CTO of TechCrunch, he came to Singapore. So he did a little event with us back in the office, and we showed him iTwin, and he's like, I fucking love these guys. Can we bring them to TechCrunch 50 at that point in time, right? In the old days. And we were like, sure. He said, but wait a minute. TechCrunch 50 only showcases companies that have never been showcased anywhere else in the world before. So they don't qualify. And the people were like, no, you cannot do that. There must be a way around it. He said, okay, if you can delete all the articles that you've written about them and remove all mentions of them on anywhere on your site, I'll consider putting them there. So we were not getting paid for this. You know.
Is this going on? This is going on record, man.
Yeah. I mean, Cal tells this story to people all the time. We were not getting paid for this. There was no incentive for us to do this at all. And it's not like TechCrunch was going to say, oh, thank you e27 for discovering this amazing company that launched at TechCrunch 50. But we did it anyway. Because we strongly believed in what they were doing. And we would rather give them the opportunity on that global platform than selfishly, you know, have them within our event and our network. And that's what happened. They got selected for TechCrunch 50, went up on stage, and ended up pitching to a global audience. And it was these kind of genuine, like sincere things that we were doing that employees and people and partners could see for themselves. So those who really knew where iTwin initially launched knew it was at an e27 event. You know, and I think that trust and that open, genuine acts that we were doing really got us to where we are today.
What's your hiring philosophy today?
Hiring philosophy today.
That's your, you know, I know you want a lot of people, right? You're short on employees. What's your philosophy today? Who are you? You know, what's your ideal employee?
I think the hiring philosophy from day one has never changed, which is whoever we hire, right, you cannot be an asshole. And the reason
that.
So the reason I say that, right, is because it is very. I think the two biggest or worst things that can ever happen to anyone, right, whether you're an employee or a founder, right, is complacency. I'm thinking about the second one. I actually completely forgot what it is. That's a word. I'll think about it later. And yeah. So the reason I say this is because within this industry, right, because you meet a lot of people and you get a lot of prominence, it is very easy, right, to suddenly be popular and be in the limelight. And when that, I would say that exposure gets to your head, right, that is the worst thing that can ever happen to any employee. When any employee ever feels that he or she is doing way more than everyone else in the company and a certain function in the company would not be able to work without him or her, that's when there's a real problem. So we make it very clear from day one, right? We don't want arrogant, complacent, or people who are assholes. So, and I think that philosophy has stuck with us even up till now. And I've had to fire people that have displayed those traits after they joined the company. I don't think it's important to know everything, but I think it's really important to have the right attitude, the right culture, and to really tell yourself that you have to fit a bigger organization and you're part of a larger team, and that is that's bringing you to where you are. So that to me has never really changed from day one.
Do you see the culture here accepting startups? Do you see people walking out of SMU and in US joining startups? Do you see that change? Because you know we've been here for a few years, and you know Silicon Valley is one thing, but Singapore is about stability, security. When people look at startups, they say, you know, this guy is starting out. I don't want to be part of his chaotic universe. I want to take a job with an MNC. What's your opinion of that?
I think there's absolutely no harm in that. There will always be people who want to work in a bank and make a lot of money. Totally fine with that. You know, a large chunk of the people that went to Silicon Valley with me, there were 20 of us, a large chunk of them ended up joining a bank, despite going through an entrepreneurial one-year experience. A large chunk of them ended up joining big companies and even the government. I think less than 5 of us actually ended up doing anything related to startups. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think the industry needs that as well. The biggest problem, right, that can ever happen is if everybody decides tomorrow that they want to start a company. And that's the worst thing, and I would say that's the thing that's really happening a lot right now. Every motherfucker's son like, oh, I want to start a company, I want to be a CEO, I'm going to get a $50,000 government grant to do whatever thing. And the problem with that is that people don't realize that you have to be a little bit nutcase up here to want to start a company. You know, the Singaporean guys, right, know that the commandos and the normal people who go through army, the commandos are just a bit weird up there, you know. And most people don't know this until they start the company. And then when they fail, and when shit happens, and they lose people's money, or more importantly, the government's money, that's when things go wrong. So, there's perfectly nothing wrong in wanting to get a big government job, but there is definitely a trend in people who want to try something different. So I've shared with a lot of people, right, that if you want to do a startup, go look for startups that are interesting or solving problems that you are passionate about first, before doing them. Go help them. You'll be able to add a lot more value there than if you just started out doing on your own. And I think the big problem is that most of the young people in Singapore do not know where to start looking. So hopefully, with sites like e27 and what the government is trying to push for, it will start getting more exposed.
So if you're a young entrepreneur, you want them to come to e27, get some idea of what's going on, and then work with some startups to get a hang of things.
So one of the things that we started doing recently is we launched a jobs platform. Because a lot of startups come to me and say, hey, I need to hire a developer, designer, whatever. So we launched a jobs platform, and it's usually within the ecosystem, right? So you guys might know about it, people who read the site might know about it. But what we've done, right, is that we reached out to NTU, to NUS, and we said, look, there are like a few hundred jobs in all these cool, amazing companies. Why don't you share this with the students in your universities and tell them that, look, there's an alternative, pool of companies that they can look for, and all these companies are dying for people. So that's kind of the extra things that we've been going that we think hopefully will help, because in most cases the only companies that can afford to exhibit at all these career fairs and career shows are the big guys, the big corporates or the governments, and the universities are not. There's no interest in them to bring the startups in, because there's no vested interest for them. So we tried to push this. So we're doing something with NTU pretty soon to get startups exposed to the students there.
What's your message for Singapore entrepreneurs? I got one message, that don't start up.
Yeah, other than don't start up, I would say be afraid, be very afraid. The Southeast Asian entrepreneurs are getting pretty kick-ass. So the guys in Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines are way hungrier, way greedier, and way more crazy about what they're doing than the people over here. So we have the advantage of money, government grants, and a pretty cool, amazing place to work with. These guys have no money, no government grants, and the only thing that they want to do is to get as successful as quickly as possible. And they're all pretty ferocious. So just looking at Echelon alone, the number of foreign companies showcasing and getting selected for the platform has always been increasing. The number of Singapore companies that get showcased there has always been decreasing. So I would say, start looking at the regional entrepreneurs. They're getting quite amazing. Pretty sure a lot of Singapore startups will not like me for saying that.
You're going to edit this. When you talk to Singapore entrepreneurs, what's their biggest falling? What's their biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge for Singapore entrepreneurs?
What do you think is missing in Singapore entrepreneurs? What do you think they need to know from you?
I think there's too much resources here for them to tap on. And because of that, right, it gets a bit too easy for them sometimes. So we forget about things like market and all that, right? We will never ever have a situation where Singapore's market will be large enough for any startup, except for a very small handful. But in most cases, right, in Singapore, if you need a space to work with, there are free co-working spaces to go to. If you need mentors, there are mentors to go to help. If you need to make money from the big companies, all their APAC HQs are over here, and you can typically get introductions to them fairly easily. If you need access to capital, there are government grants, there's money. So it's really not that difficult. I think the biggest challenge they have is obviously with hiring, but that exists in every part of the world. So I feel that the entrepreneurs here have it a bit easy, because the main challenges that most other guys have, they don't really have over here. And they really should be going out a lot more. They really should be exploring the region a lot more and understanding how the different regions work. Because if they can figure out how Thailand works or how Indonesia works, they will have a much better advantage. Or if they can figure out who to partner with locally, they will have a much better advantage. Because the Singapore brand, interestingly, still has a lot of high regard when you go overseas.
So you're saying a Singapore entrepreneur has a better chance in Thailand than a Thai entrepreneur?
No, he does not. But because he has the money over here, and because he has the Singapore brand name backing him, people will be a lot more willing and open to work with him, as opposed to just local
Do you
talent.
see that happening? Do you see Singapore entrepreneurs going to Thailand and selling in Thailand?
Not very much.
Why not? I was trying to lead you to this question, which is why are Singapore entrepreneurs so obsessed with Singapore and the geography here?
I think it's plain ignorance is one thing, laziness is the other thing.
When you went out and you created Thai, we have chapters in 10 countries now.
Yeah.
Why are Singapore entrepreneurs not going out and selling in Thailand and India and Philippines and Indonesia?
They're just not hungry enough. Shit, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this as well. Yeah, they're not hungry enough. We do echelon satellites all over the region. How many Singapore companies actually bother to fly down to our Thailand event and learn about the market there? Very, very rarely. But the winner, so in 2012, the winner of Echelon 2012 was a Thai company. We didn't even have a Thai satellite at that point in time. This guy flew to Vietnam to pitch his company. So just think about that for a moment, right? And for us to get Singapore companies to participate, it's ridiculously difficult. So it's just really, when you have too many things around you, you're too spoon-fed with stuff, you just take it for granted. A lot of people don't even have access to proper education in the region.
So I'll turn this around and ask you this question. If you had an option to start in any other country, and you were not a Singaporean, which country would you pick to start?
To start e27?
Yes.
Thailand.
Why?
So the party scene aside,
but you said you have participated, you've seen a better scene in Indonesia, right?
both are special in their own ways. And Indonesia is a bit better because I speak the language. But so the beauty of Thailand is that it's got a very large local market. I think it's about 60 million people. But the talent pool in Thailand is way better than any other market I've seen in Southeast Asia. A lot of the entrepreneurs there speak English, which really helps. But if you go on the train, you look at the consumers, you look at the way they use devices, the way they access social media, they're all very far ahead of the curve as compared to the rest of the region. One of the top 5 most Instagram locations in the world is a shopping mall in Thailand. I think for some time, right, Bangkok or somewhere in Thailand was one of the largest countries on Facebook. They're very smart developers and designers in Thailand. If you go to their co-working spaces, they beat some of the nicest looking offices in Singapore. So to me, I think Thailand, right, culturally and from an attitude perspective, has got a lot of potential to be the startup hub of this region. Their only problem, or their only a drawback, is that the investor ecosystem isn't that mature yet, which will really slowly start to change. And I think the language barrier is still a bit of an issue. Other than that, I think Thailand is a startup hub of Southeast Asia.
Before we take some questions, one last question. Where do you see yourself, and this is a very standard interview question, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
I hate these questions. I don't know why, but I don't usually think very far ahead.
I got to do my due diligence.
I would like to think that I'll be in a better place. I think the most important thing is that I hope to see myself working on doing something that has got real value in the industry, or whatever industry it is, and is solving a real problem. So I hope never to be sucked into a corporate job or something that I'm doing just to feed the kids and make the wife happy.
A slightly different version of that question. Do you think there can be e27? I'm not saying your e27, just any website here that has this amazing pull that can be, so that someday TechCrunch would be called as e27 of Silicon Valley. Do you think that in our lifetime that would be possible? To have an amazing startup culture here and a blog that just covers everything?
I think we kind of really have that here, right? The Singapore startup culture is fairly amazing. There's a lot of things happening. You just have to go and look at the right places for that to happen. Echelon happens here every year. It's pretty much the most amazing conference you can ever go for in this region.
So the answer is yes.
Yes, hell yeah. Right. We already have that. And I think sometimes we keep quibbing about the fact that we are not there yet, and we don't appreciate and realize how far we have come. 5 years ago, right, this place was shit. There was absolutely nothing here.
You had a lot of beeps in your YouTube video.
There was no investors, there was nothing. Today you've got amazing co-working spaces, you've got media companies, you've got cool startups popping up every other day, you've got a crap load of investors ready to invest in companies. And you've got the government having 1 million and one scheme to help entrepreneurs. What more can we ask for? Other than hoping that the government will not clamp down on foreigners coming to Singapore. I think that's the biggest problem.
Amen. Let's have a few questions.
I like your t-shirt color.
Thank you very much. Danny Moskowitz, Coin Republic, Bitcoin Venture. So recently the MDA announced that publications would have to put up a $25,000 bond and other things. Has that affected your business? And if that was the case, when you started E27, would you have started it?
So that whole bond thing was more irrelevant to media companies that were covering current affairs and more Singapore news. And a lot of our news isn't about Singapore, so we don't really fall into that category. And if I had to start it today, I would have still done it anyway, because technology doesn't really fall under that purview of that government issue for now.
Any other questions? Right here, red t-shirt.
Do you see E27 evolving into an angel list in the foreseeable future?
Okay, I've been asked that question quite a bit, like how can we be more like angel list? Our philosophy towards building products in the company has always been centered around how can we solve problems that we are kind of doing in an offline manner on an online platform. So the jobs platform that we built, we were doing that in an offline manner by helping companies ad hoc. So we built a platform for that. We launched a DB platform, we launched this thing called a giveaway engine, and all of these were solving our problem. Now with angel investment, right, I don't think this region, the way investment is done in this region is like how it's done in Silicon Valley. Like Jason Calacanis, right? He sent out a mailer some time back saying that he backed a few companies and people could follow on and invest and all that. That doesn't work over here. I don't think simply copying Angel.co would work in this region. But what I think would work, right, is better education of the investors in this region. There are a pool of investors who would very much rather put in $2 million in a condo than $10,000 or $20,000 in a startup or $50,000 in a fund. How do we educate people and show them the opportunities in tech investments? That's the kind of problems I would prefer solving. So like in November, at the end of this, in November this year, we're launching a conference specifically targeted at investors and getting them educated on technology investments. So we're getting the guys from Vertex, Temasek's investment company. We're getting startups who have raised money to really showcase and say, these are the kind of investments that are available in this region, and these are the kind of funds that you can get involved in. So I think the scene over here would really take a few more years before an open funding-based platform would really work. And in any case, I mean, MAS has regulations against crowdfunding or any open solicitation of investment. So it will take a while for all these regulations to pan out before any of that comes to play.
To that question, which are the 3 most successful exits in the recent Singapore startup history that you would name? Because we need more success stories here. We need more success heroes here, right? In your mind, what are the 3 most successful exits that you would name?
I think clearly Vicky was the big one, the one that got acquired by Rakuten. I think the SG Khamat deal was pretty good as well, the one by
But that really is not a startup, right? SG Khamat is a profitable business, doing business day after day, month after month, right?
There's another one called Semantic 3. They were acquired by a very prominent Silicon Valley company. They didn't disclose who, which I think was really interesting because that was a solid acquisition in terms of acqui-hire. So they were really smart engineers getting brought over to the valley.
How about Hungry Go Where?
Hungry Go Where was depending on who you talk to, they'll give you different views, but I wouldn't say it was the most favorable.
It's still a good start, right? Still
acquisition.
a good first step.
Yeah, I think an investor did tell me before, right, that regardless of the investment amount, it was a really good thing that Hungry Go Where got acquired. Because if that company died, it would have reflected very badly on Singapore's M&A ecosystem. If you know the Hungry Go Where story, right, I mean, Hong An and Dennis, right, worked their balls off for many, many years before they got to, anywhere, like in the mainstream side. So, to give credit where credit is due, I'm very happy that they got acquired, but financially, it wasn't the best deal, that I think would have given this region due justice.
While we're on the topic of making lists, top threes, so who would you rank as the top 3 seed investors in Southeast Asia and the top 3 Series A investors in Southeast Asia?
Be very careful with this one.
Since you're making top 3s.
Top 3 seed investors.
Series A.
Series A. Top 3 Series A. You better have Sequoia.
Just give all my investors.
Well, not
Southeast Asia, so Sequoia.
Sequoia Capital.
So I think I say Vertex is probably one of my favorites. I would hope that they would do a lot more.
And why? Why would they be in the top 3?
I mean, the team that's running the fund, they really understand what they're doing. They're very careful about the companies they fund. Because obviously they're managing Temasik's money. But more so, right, the kind of companies that they've invested in recently are clearly the ones that are.
What about seed investors?
Seed on the early stage?
Early stage, right? Yeah.
So depending on how you look at seed, I would say some of the TIS funds are really promising. So the guys from Golden Gate Ventures as well as Jungle Ventures, I think those two would be they're the more active
Golden Gate
ones.
would be my number 1 pick.
And it's really not about the money, but the amount of value that the mentors can provide to the company. And as far as I'm concerned, right, everyone regards Vincent Loria, the managing partner at Golden Gate, as someone who really provides value to the company, regardless of how much money he puts in.
Just to add to what he just said. When I met Vincent, he told me, I was talking to him about investment and all. He told me, are you making profits? I said, yes. He said, why? So that's a very good statement. Why are you making profits? And that's the ethos that Valley brings, which is, why are you making profits, man? Invest that money back in business, raise more investment. And Asian investors will ask for profits, will ask for EBITDA. You know what EBITDA is, right? Earnings before blah blah blah. And we got to change these ethos. A startup cannot make profits, and investors here look for profits. And they equate investing in startups with investing in flats and apartments, right?
Yeah. In most cases, yes.
So, do you want to make profits or do you want to grow? How do you look at this challenge when investors talk to you and say, I need profits?
I think it's a balance. I don't think Asian companies should. I wouldn't entirely agree with the model that you're proposing. I don't think Asian companies can always go for the high growth, high burn, and very little profit model. I don't know, Zopim would be a great example, right? In the early days, you guys really buckled down, and now you guys are extremely profitable, I assume. But in most cases, I think it's a very fine balance. Because if you're just going to focus on growth, and when the time comes when you need money from that next round of investment, it's not always easy to get that kind of investment over here. And in most cases, right, the government-backed incubators actually have a cap in terms of what kind of valuation they can give you. So, I think having a fine balance between the two is very important.
Not saying this
profits are key actually.
For investors. And entrepreneurs, yes, profit is key, right? But Twitter has been making losses. Facebook made losses for years. So for investors to look at your company and say, I need profits, that's not very fair, is it?
Yeah, but the companies that are started in Silicon Valley, and the ecosystems are completely different. The mindsets of the investors there are completely different. And we cannot just bring those models back here.
Hopefully they'll change.
Likewise, right, people say, what if Facebook was started in Singapore? Would it be as successful as whether it was started in the US? And clearly no, because the dynamics of the way the service spread within the universities was extremely different from the way stuff spreads over here. So you've got to be realistic about where you're building your business. If you're building your business in Southeast Asia and Singapore, look at the scene and see what fits for you. Don't try and build a fast-growing company and then blame the region when you cannot raise money or your company goes bust. You know? So I think that one is more, that would be the right way to go.
So Golden Gate Ventures, Jungle, who's the third one? Who's not your investor, by the way?
None of them are my investors. I can name mine. Mine, 8 Capital. 8 Capital is a very unique investor started by the founders of Kesha Media Group, a Malaysian company that has listed, I think, 3 or 4 companies around Asia already. More listings coming up. And they take a very unique proposition to investment, whereby they look at extremely early stage companies that are doing financially very well, but need that extra leg up to kind of grow. And then they bring in another round of money from the region.
I'll plug in my and Roystone's new fund now. we're getting into angel market as well. Any other questions? Right here.
Hey, my name's Ryan, and this isn't directly E27 related question. It's more something that I'm kind of facing right now, trying to find pains in my target market. So basically, I've bought a leads list from virtual assistants, so I have a bunch of emails and phone numbers from people in my target market, and I'm trying to reach out to them. But nobody's replying to my emails, and it's very difficult to get a decision maker on the phone. What would you suggest for reaching out to target markets to try and find the pains, so you can solve them with a SaaS or something like that?
So when we were trying to reach out to companies in the very early days, we figured out very early on that there would be a lot more value if we reached out to 10 companies and made sure all 10 got back to us, as opposed to reaching out to 100 companies and hoping that some would get back. And I always feel that it's important to find the right connector between you and the company first, so that that validation of that introduction is made first. So if I were you, right, I would go figure out, okay, these are the companies I need to meet. Who within my network has a common friend, a common introduction, and go through that person instead. Because if the introduction comes from him, that company would take it a lot more seriously than if it just came directly from you. Like, I mean, if Shashank introduced me to a startup and say, meet this guy and talk to him, I would definitely take it with high value and high regard, as opposed to the guy coming to me directly. And it's not just, it's a human nature thing, because I think most of these companies get bombarded with a lot of messages every other day.
So what you're saying is try and make it more personalized to the company instead of trying to do a mass email sort of thing.
Yeah. Because in mass emails, I mean, the worst case that can happen is that people start flagging you as spam, and I think that's when it will go downhill for you.
I'll look into that. Thanks.
Actually, Naren sitting next to you he's a head-editor. He can introduce you to a lot of good companies. Networking. Your first 100 customers will come through personal contacts. The next 1,000 can come through an email, but the first 100 have to come through your personal contacts.
And one more thing, go to events, ask people for help. So you don't have to do it alone, right? If you need to meet people, let's say in the education industry, go to education-related events, or just start pinging people, asking them, hey, I need help with this. I'm sure there will be a lot of people who want to help.
Yeah, hi, my name is Hiroshi, and I'm trying to bring a service launched in Japan already to Singapore market. But is there like a certain thing that we should think about to enter this Singapore market? Actually, I'm doing a business card management app, which is called 8, and we're trying to bring it here. And so it's for like business persons to use the service. But I'm now looking for the way to put in our market service inside here. But is there any particular thing that you suggest a company to think about?
I mean, there's a lot of things to think about, right? So in your case, right, figuring out who in the company would be the right person to talk to is the most important thing to start thinking about. If you were targeting government, right, having a local person would make a world of a difference. Or having someone who has the right government relationships would make a world of a difference. And the other thing also is, so companies in Japan put a certain premium on products. And understanding whether companies in Singapore put that same premium would save you a lot of trouble. Because in most cases, in different markets, right, different people put a different price tag on items. And it really could be because there's no budget there, but in most cases I think it's the education for the industry that's missing. So like a simple example, right, in the early days, right, in Thailand, people didn't see the value in paying money to attend events. You know? So we had to educate companies, we had to educate startups and sell them that value. And if we had known that earlier, we would have actually planned for that much more in advance.
How do you educate startups? Do you do mass campaigns? Do you get them to a place? That's a massive challenge, right?
So in the early days, we worked with local partners a lot. We worked with local communities that were already talking to these companies. And when we went there, we sold them that value. We showed them case studies, examples of how other companies in the region could get value by working with us.
I remember going to a startup weekend event where e27 was participating.
It was a long time ago.
And they have black t-shirt. Astro.
Hello, my name is Thorsten. There's a lot of noise and a lot of excitement around Myanmar in the last months. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So you want to hear my thoughts pertaining to the
because it's probably the largest untouched market, and it would be very interesting to see traditional industries like telco companies and startups growing up, side by side. So it's a very interesting and very exciting playing field, I think.
And do you see Myanmarese startups taking part in your conferences?
I think it's Myanmar has a whole slew of challenges at this stage that really focus on the bare necessities first. And if I were a startup, right, and I wanted to really take advantage of Myanmar, I would look at travel. The easiest entry point to any new country is the travel industry. And coincidentally, I actually have a friend who was sharing Instagram pictures of his trip in Myanmar. So if I was a company, right, I would focus on going there and making sure you get as many local people who can be like tour guides or give local experiences for people wanting to come into the country. From a business standpoint, right, I think it would take a while for the Myanmar people, the Myanmar businesses to really get up to speed in terms of what kind of businesses they can do. So if you are a social media or digital marketing company, probably a bit too early for you to go in. But that doesn't mean you don't go in, right? I think you still can go in, start giving to the community first. Start going there, building the right relationships, mentorships, coaching sessions that are free. And down the road, when they are ready to do stuff, I'm sure they will be able to spend money with you. We did those in Indonesia in the very early days.
Doing an event in Myanmar?
Not yet, no.
How soon do you think you'll be? 2 years from now? 3 years from now?
Maybe 2 years. Yeah. So like in the early days in Indonesia, there were no real startups. It was mainly developers. So we would hold free community events. We would hang out with the people that were active in that scene and just share with them what was happening in Singapore. So it was like a way to inspire them. And then a few years later, when we were doing more activities that they could pay for and they were more ready for, then it made sense for us.
Have you seen any local startups successfully penetrate the large markets like the US and the EU, especially on the word go?
I think on the US, EU side, I'm not sure, to be honest. On the US side, there have been a few companies that tried to go there, but quite badly failed, to be honest. The smarter companies are the ones who are taking money from the European side or even the US side and really expanding their foothold in Asia Pacific. And the smartest one I would say is Property Guru. So they raised like tens of millions of dollars from a European-based investor to really expand their footprint within this region. And in most cases, right, the strategy for companies to go to the US wouldn't entirely make sense, especially if you have such a large market in your own background, But the companies that have somewhat penetrated the US market